My nephew said, "Nobody likes you. You just pay." Everyone laughed. So I canceled their vacation, moved out, and stopped covering the rent. I never expected one ordinary Friday dinner to cut through 10 years of denial. But that was exactly what happened. My name is Adrian. I was 34, single, child-free, and working a steady job in information technology. In my family, I had spent most of my adult life as the dependable one. I paid my bills on time, rarely raised my voice, and somehow covered the check whenever everyone else decided it belonged to me. I was the person they called when a payment was late, a car would not start, groceries ran low, or an emergency appeared. They leaned on me easily and often acted irritated once the problem was solved. I told myself that was simply what family did. The truth was that I wanted peace and had a bad habit of saying yes long after I wanted to say no. Looking back, I had made my generosity so dependable that everyone eventually treated it like part of the household infrastructure. My sister Vanessa and I had been genuinely close when we were children. As adults, though, our relationship became polite rather than intimate. She had married young and had 2 children by the time she was 25. Over the years, I watched a sense of entitlement settle into her personality and disguise itself as family loyalty. Whenever she wanted something, she framed it as something we all needed to do for one another. Whenever I resisted, she acted as if I were betraying some sacred rule. Her husband Grant was not openly hostile to me, but he had loud opinions, inconsistent employment, and a habit of treating my silence as judgment. I suspected he disliked the fact that I was reliable because it made his own choices harder to ignore. At the same time, he never hesitated to accept my help. For 4 years, the 3 of us and their 2 children had shared a large rental house. The arrangement began after Vanessa and Grant fell behind on their mortgage and I moved back to town because of a job transfer. Vanessa suggested that we rent a place together, split expenses, and give them time to recover financially. She promised it would be temporary. I thought I would save some money, help my sister, and spend more time with my niece and nephew. At the time, it sounded like a reasonable compromise. 4 years later, I was still in the same house and still paying more than my share because, as Vanessa often reminded me, I made more money. The difference had never been formally agreed upon. It grew through small assumptions. If a utility bill ran high, I covered the gap. If groceries cost more than expected, Vanessa asked me to send extra. If something broke, Grant explained why I was best positioned to replace it. The dynamic felt less like an explosion than a slow leak, and I stayed because they were family. Moving felt exhausting, and I kept believing they would become stable. The warning signs were obvious. Vanessa borrowed my car for 1 day and returned it 3 days later with an empty tank and a new dent. Grant suggested I should pay for upgraded internet because I used it for work, although he spent most evenings streaming videos in high definition. Restaurant meals ended with someone smiling and asking, "You have this one right," as if my paying were an inside joke. I let those things pass because conflict always seemed more expensive than the money. I told myself they probably did not realize how much they depended on me. I convinced myself that perhaps they appreciated me, but did not know how to express it. Then came the vacation. Vanessa had been stressed the kids were burned out from school, and Grant was between jobs again. I had unused paid time off and a decent bonus sitting in my account. Against my better judgment, I offered to rent an oceanfront beach house for all 5 of us. It was 2 hours away, large enough for everyone, and available for 7 days. My treat, I said, and I meant it. I wanted to give them something joyful. More than that, I wanted to feel connected to them again. Vanessa cried when I told her. The kids became excited immediately. Grant gave me a fist bump and said, "You're the man, Adrian." For a brief moment, I believed the trip might reset the way we related to one another. Instead, the vacation quickly became another example of how my generosity turned into someone else's property. Vanessa chose the dates, assigned bedrooms, made a grocery list, and emailed me a spreadsheet of responsibilities, even though I was paying for the rental. She then wanted to invite her best friend and the friend's children for a night or 2, and pouted when I hesitated. Grant bragged about our beach house as though he owned it. The children, especially Vanessa's 15-year-old son, Mason, had also grown comfortable treating me like an assistant. He expected rides to soccer announced when snacks were gone as though restocking were my job, and joked that my room smelled like old books. I dismissed much of it as teenage behavior. I assumed the adults around him would correct him when he crossed a line. I was wrong. The dinner happened on a Friday night. We had ordered takeout, and of course, I had paid. The 5 of us were sitting around the table. Mason and his younger sister were looking at their phones. Grant was halfway through a beer. Vanessa was scrolling on her tablet while asking me for what felt like the 4th time how many bedrooms the beach house had. Then Mason laughed. It was not the kind of laugh you share with someone. It was aimed directly at me. He looked up from his phone and said loudly, "Why are you even here? Nobody actually likes you. We only invite you because you pay for everything." The room went completely still. For one stunned second, I expected the adults to react. I thought Vanessa would correct him immediately. I thought Grant would at least look shocked. I thought someone would recognize that the sentence was not harmless teasing, but a cruel summary of the fear I had been suppressing for years. No one defended me. Vanessa snorted, as if Mason had delivered the funniest line she had heard all week. Grant gave a low chuckle and shook his head. Even my niece covered a giggle with her cup, though she looked uncertain. That was the moment something inside me became clear. I was not family in the way I had believed. To them, I was a wallet with legs, a chauffeur with reliable internet, and a convenient adult whose value was measured by what he could provide. Heat moved up my neck as I looked around the dining room. I had paid for half that space. I had bought the table. I had spent years helping maintain a household in which I still felt like a guest. More importantly, I realized I had been playing a role in a script they had no intention of changing. They expected me to absorb every insult, solve every problem, and continue paying because that was what I had always done. I stood up without shouting. There was no dramatic speech and no argument. For the first time in years, I felt something closer to clarity than anger. I walked to my room, opened my laptop, and canceled the beach house reservation. Fortunately, it was still within the full refund period. Then I packed a suitcase. About 10 minutes later, I walked back through the dining room with my bag in my hand. Vanessa finally looked up. "Wait, where are you going?" she asked. Normally, that question would have triggered a long explanation. I would have softened my language, reassured everyone, and taken responsibility for the discomfort caused by my own boundary. This time, I did not feel guilty. I looked at her and said, "Out." Then I left. I checked into a modest hotel near the highway because I had no plan beyond getting away from the house. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the carpet was worn, and the front desk had mentioned late checkout in the casual way that suggested nobody enforced it. I sat on the edge of the bed without unpacking while my phone vibrated every few minutes. At first I ignored most of the messages. The previews told me enough. Vanessa wrote, "You seriously need to grow up." Grant sent, "Real mature dude." My mother, who lived out of state, texted that she was not taking sides, but thought I was being a bit much. That phrase stayed with me because it was the same response I had received every time I tried to establish even a small boundary. When I said it was unfair for me to pay more than half the rent, I was making too much of it. When Mason broke my headphones and I suggested there should be consequences, I was being overly sensitive. When I mentioned that decisions about our shared home were often made without me, everyone acted as if I had detonated a bomb in the kitchen. My discomfort was always excessive. Their dependence was always normal. I did not sleep that night. My thoughts moved between anger, sadness, embarrassment, and a grief I could not immediately explain. I was mourning something, but I was not sure whether it was the family I wished I had, the relationship I remembered from childhood, or the years I had spent trying to earn affection by being useful. The next morning, I walked to a small diner, ordered pancakes I did not really want, and stared through the window while the waitress refilled my coffee 3 times without asking. Sitting there, I began to understand that going back would not restore anything. It would only teach them that they could laugh at me, pressure me, and still count on my money by the next rent cycle. By noon, I had found a furnished short-term rental on the other side of town. It was more expensive than my share of the house, but it was clean, quiet, and entirely mine. I signed the lease that afternoon and paid 3 months in advance. I told no one. For once, I made a decision without preparing a defense for it. The calls did not stop, but their purpose changed. During the first week, everything centered on the canceled vacation. Vanessa left increasingly frantic voice messages. "The kids were so excited, Adrian," she said. "I already told everyone about it." Her concern seemed less connected to what Mason had said than to the embarrassment of explaining why the trip was gone. She tried to use nostalgia, reminding me of childhood trips to the lake with our parents and accusing me of taking that kind of memory away from her children. Grant adopted a more self-righteous tone. He told me that punishing Mason did not make me the bigger person and suggested that we could all talk if I stopped being emotional. His message assumed that my leaving had interrupted some thoughtful lesson they would otherwise have taught their son, even though neither parent had corrected him at the table. By the second week, however, the vacation almost disappeared from their messages. The house became the real subject. Vanessa first asked casually when I planned to return because rent was due soon. Then Grant wrote, "The landlord wants to know whether you're still on the lease. I told him you're just taking a break." That message made their assumptions obvious. They did not believe I had left. They believed I would cool down, feel guilty, miss the children, and return with my wallet open. I sent Vanessa one short message, the first direct communication since I walked out. "I'm not coming back. You can arrange to transfer the lease into your name." She did not reply for 2 days. When she finally did, she sent several long paragraphs. She wrote that I could not simply leave them, that my decision affected everyone, and that I had made a commitment. She reminded me that I had promised to help when they were struggling, and repeated something I had said years earlier about families staying together. The real reason for her panic appeared only at the end. "We can't afford the full rent without you, Adrian." That sentence clarified everything. They were not grieving my absence, they were calculating the financial gap. I had not left an emotional void, I had removed a subsidy. The longer I refused to return, the more direct the pressure became. My mother eventually called during my lunch break. Her voice was gentle in a way that sounded rehearsed. She asked whether I was eating and whether the new place was safe. Then shifted to the reason for the call. Vanessa had explained what happened. My mother agreed that Mason's comment had been awful, but emphasized that he was a teenager and teenagers said things they did not mean. "He meant it," I said. She paused before telling me that even if he had meant it, I needed to be the adult in the room. I laughed quietly, not because anything was funny, but because the unfairness was finally impossible to miss. "I've been the adult in that room for 10 years, Mom." She had no answer. The call ended with her saying she did not want the family to fall apart over one incident. By then, I understood that the incident had not broken the family. It had exposed the structure that had already been there. Over the next several weeks, I settled into the rental. The quiet was so complete that it felt unfamiliar. There were no heavy footsteps on the stairs, no one entering my room without knocking, no request to send grocery money at the end of the week, and no passive-aggressive notes from Grant about dishes he had used and expected me to wash. I thought freedom would feel immediate and joyful. Instead, it arrived slowly. My body was away from the house, but my mind was still waiting for the next demand. Then, a Thursday night phone call changed the situation from painful to dangerous. I was getting ready for bed when an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, I received a text. "Adrian, this is Mr. Bennett, your landlord. Please call me when you can. It's urgent." A sick feeling moved through my stomach. I called immediately. Mr. Bennett answered on the first ring and apologized for contacting me so late. He said he needed to clarify something, because Vanessa and Grant had told him I intended to remain on the lease while living elsewhere temporarily. According to them, the move was part of a family disagreement, and I had agreed to continue carrying my share until things were resolved. I told him that was not true. He hesitated, then explained that they had submitted a signed lease renewal the previous week. My name was on it. It contained an electronic signature connected to the same email address used before. I sat down because my legs suddenly felt unsteady. I didn't sign anything I said. There was a long silence. Mr. Bennett asked whether I was saying the signature was unauthorized. "Yes," I replied. "That wasn't me." I barely slept after that call. The dinner insult had been cruel, but this was different. Vanessa and Grant had used my name to keep me financially responsible for a home I had clearly said I was leaving. They had lied to the landlord and submitted a renewal as though I had approved it. The next morning, I printed every relevant text and email, gathered my identification, and drove to the property management office. I explained the timeline, showed them my message stating that I would not return, and confirmed that I had never authorized anyone to sign on my behalf. The office manager remained professional, but I could see that she was disturbed. Later that day, Mr. Bennett called to apologize. He told me the renewal would be voided and that Vanessa and Grant would be responsible for arranging and paying for the tenancy going forward. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat in my car staring at my hands for nearly 10 minutes. That was the true breaking point. It was not Mason's insult, Vanessa's laughter, or the messages telling me to stop overreacting. It was the realization that they were willing to misrepresent my consent and tie me to a legal and financial obligation so they would not have to face their own responsibilities. I had spent years describing their behavior as inconsiderate because that word allowed me to remain loyal. What they had done was more serious. It was manipulative, reckless, and potentially damaging to my credit and future. For the first time, being polite no longer felt kind. It felt unsafe. I did not leave the property office with a perfect plan or a dramatic sense of victory. I sat in the car and breathed until the shaking in my hands stopped. The quiet felt like the aftermath of a controlled detonation. There had been no screaming, but something had been permanently destroyed. The belief that I could keep helping them without eventually being harmed by it. I was not even as angry as I expected. That was the unsettling part. Somewhere deep down, I think I had always known what the relationship was. I had simply covered the truth with softer explanations, because the word family made almost anything seem forgivable. But family did not sign your name without permission. Family did not convert your reliability into an obligation and then accuse you of betrayal when you tried to leave. When I returned to the rental, I caught myself calling it home. I stood in my own kitchen while the kettle boiled and listened to a child outside riding a bicycle and laughing with effortless freedom. For a moment, I envied someone too young to understand what it felt like to be valued mainly for what he provided. Then I sat at the table and started writing. It was not a letter. I simply needed to move the memories outside myself. I wrote about every time I had been called too sensitive, every holiday I financed and left feeling empty, every birthday when I received a rushed card after making everyone else's celebration special. and every request for money that became my responsibility. I wrote about the car, the bills, the dinners, the broken headphones, and the way every complaint was turned into evidence that I was difficult. I kept going until 2 in the morning. When I closed the notebook, the pain remained, but it no longer felt shapeless. The next few weeks were quiet because I chose them to be. Vanessa stopped calling. Grant stopped sending messages. My mother tried a few times, but when I replied only that I was safe and doing well, she eventually stopped pushing. Without constant household emergencies, I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I focused on work and volunteered for projects I had previously declined, because evenings and weekends were always being consumed by someone else's needs. I began eating lunch with coworkers instead of disappearing into my office. People invited me to trivia nights, casual drinks, and weekend hikes. At first, socializing felt awkward. I had forgotten how to talk about a life that was not organized around my sister's latest problem. Gradually, I remembered how to laugh at bad jokes, ask about someone's weekend, because I was genuinely interested, and tell stories that did not begin with, "Vanessa needs help with something." One afternoon, my manager Natalie asked me to step into her office. She smiled and told me I had been doing excellent work. "I don't know what changed," she said, "but I'm glad to see it." I shrugged because I did not know how to explain that I had stopped spending half my attention anticipating demands from home. Fewer distractions, I guess. Natalie told me a team lead position would open the next quarter and that she thought I should apply. The suggestion affected me more deeply than I expected. It was not only about a promotion, it was evidence that I had value outside the role of family problem solver. I was competent, responsible, and reliable. For years, those qualities had felt like burdens because people treated them as reasons I should carry more. At work, where they were respected rather than exploited, they became strengths again. I also started therapy. I had considered it for years, but there was always another expense that seemed more urgent. A bill Vanessa could not cover, a repair Grant delayed, groceries, or some emergency that became mine as soon as I heard about it. Sitting across from someone whose job was to listen rather than dismiss me felt strange. We talked about childhood responsibility, conflict, and why I had learned to associate usefulness with belonging. One day, my therapist said, "You've been taught to believe love is something you earn. Real love isn't transactional. It doesn't keep a ledger." Then she added, "Your absence is showing you what they valued. Their strongest reactions are about what you did for them, not about losing you as a person. That isn't your fault, but you need to see it clearly." Both statements stayed with me. Evidence of that distinction kept appearing. Vanessa eventually sent another message, but it was not an apology. She explained that they were having trouble covering the rent and asked whether I could help for a few months. She wrapped the request in emotional language, said the children missed me, and claimed Mason was sorry if he had upset me. He was not sorry for what he said. He was supposedly sorry that I had interpreted it badly. I did not respond. Instead, I began clearing away the physical remnants of that period of my life. I donated an old couch I had purchased for the shared house, gave away a spare set of dishes, and sold a few unused items online. I was not doing it to punish anyone. Those objects simply felt connected to a version of me whose purpose had been to make other people's lives easier. I no longer wanted to build my home around that role. As the pressure faded, I began imagining a future again. The changes were small at first. I took a weekend trip to the mountains. I opened an old sketchbook and started drawing for fun. I enrolled in a cooking class and discovered that I enjoyed experimenting with grilled cheese combinations far more than any reasonable adult probably should. I made friends who had never seen me pay a family bill, rescue anyone from a missed payment, or apologize for needing space. To them, I was simply Adrian, the quiet guy with unexpectedly dry jokes, the coworker who was good at solving complicated problems, and the person who seemed to be returning to life after a long absence. The difference was subtle, but powerful. They liked being around me even when I was not doing anything for them. Then my niece called. Not Mason, not Vanessa, not Grant. My niece Sophie was 14, intelligent, shy, and usually gentle, in a way that made her easy to overlook in a loud household. We had not spoken since I left. When I answered, she said, "Uncle Adrian," so softly that it sounded as if she was unsure she still had permission to call me. My voice changed immediately. "Hey Sophie, are you okay?" She was silent for a moment, then asked, "Why don't you come around anymore?" My chest tightened. I sat on the edge of my bed and held the phone closer. I told her the situation was complicated. She said Vanessa had told her I was angry at Mason, but then added, "You didn't even say goodbye." She did not sound accusatory. She sounded hurt. I swallowed and told her the truth in the simplest way I could. "I didn't leave because of you, sweetheart. It wasn't even only because of Mason. It was bigger than that. But I should have said goodbye to you, and I'm sorry." After another pause, she whispered, "I miss you." I closed my eyes. "I miss you too." We talked for several minutes about ordinary things, school, a teacher she liked, and a new video game she had started playing. I promised to call again, and she made me promise twice. After we hung up, I sat staring at the wall. That conversation revealed the part of leaving that no boundary could make painless. There were innocent people in that house. I loved the children. I had watched them grow. Not every memory was bad. Walking away from Vanessa and Grant also meant changing my relationship with Sophie, and I did not yet know how to protect that bond without returning to the role that had harmed me. Sophie's call stayed with me for days. It did not make me regret leaving, but it reminded me that the damage extended beyond the people who created it. I began thinking more carefully about what came next. I did not want revenge in the theatrical sense. I did not want shouting public humiliation or a dramatic confrontation. I wanted clarity, legal protection, and a way to remain a steady presence for Sophie without allowing her parents to use that connection to pull me back into financial dependence. The situation with the forged signature had also changed the stakes. I could not simply disappear and hope Vanessa and Grant respected my boundaries. They had already shown they were willing to use my identity when my consent became inconvenient. I needed advice, documentation, and consequences strong enough to prevent it from happening again. For years, I had underestimated the amount of leverage I possessed because I thought leverage meant controlling other people. What I actually had was information, documentation, and the ability to stop participating. I had been the quiet helper, the person who solved problems before anyone else had to face them. Once I stepped back, I could finally see the structure of the household from the outside. Vanessa and Grant had built much of their stability around the assumption that I would always cover whatever they could not. My income supported more than my room. My availability filled gaps in transportation, childcare, groceries, utilities, and emergencies. Removing myself did not create their problems. It revealed how many problems had been concealed by my presence. The anger returned, but it felt different from the anger I experienced at the dinner table. It was not loud or impulsive. It was focused. I was no longer willing to let Vanessa and Grant describe exploitation as family loyalty, while privately using my name to protect themselves. I called Mr. Bennett again and explained more of the history. I told him that I had covered rent shortages several times to prevent the household from falling behind, that Vanessa had once used my card for the electric bill without asking after forgetting to make the payment, and that shared cost had repeatedly been represented in ways that pushed more responsibility onto me because I earned more. Mr. Bennett sounded surprised. He told me Vanessa and Grant had portrayed the situation as a temporary emotional disagreement and had implied that I was acting unpredictably. I laughed without humor. That description was exactly how they handled every boundary. They turned the person resisting them into the problem. Before we ended the call, Mr. Bennett mentioned that the current lease would expire in 3 months and that Vanessa and Grant were already 1 month behind. I did not celebrate the news. I simply noted it. Their finances had always been unstable, but I had rarely seen the full consequences because I stepped in before those consequences arrived. Now there was nothing between their choices and the results. After the call, I began a task I had avoided for years. I went through old emails, bank statements, payment app records, and digital receipts from the entire 4-year living arrangement. I created a folder called Household Expenses and divided it into categories: rent overages, utilities, groceries, furniture repairs, transportation, and emergencies. Every payment I could verify became a dated document. Every message explaining why I had been asked to cover more was saved beside the corresponding record. By the end of the week, the compiled file was 77 pages long. I was not preparing an immediate lawsuit. I did not even know whether I would ever use the folder. Organizing it mattered because it replaced the vague feeling of being used with something concrete. For years, each request had seemed isolated. Put together, the pattern was undeniable. The records also protected me if Vanessa and Grant tried to claim I owed them money or had agreed to continue supporting the house. I brought the entire situation back to therapy, including the forged renewal. The canceled trip, the pressure from my mother, and the fear that maintaining contact with Sophie would reopen the same cycle. My therapist listened and then said, "You're not overreacting. You're reacting appropriately to a long pattern that became more serious when they used your name without permission." Hearing that was strangely powerful. I had spent so much time being told my reactions were excessive that simple validation felt unfamiliar. When I explained that I still wanted to be part of Sophie's life, my therapist urged me to think long-term. "You don't have to be a superhero crashing through the window," she said. "Be the steady person who stays available without surrendering his boundaries." I understood. If I rescued Sophie from every consequence of her parents' decisions, I would recreate the same role in another form. What I could do was make sure she knew leaving the house did not mean I stopped loving her. I wrote her a warm, simple letter, telling her I missed her, was proud of her, and cared about her life even when I was not around. I made clear that she could always call me. I included a sketch of her favorite video game character, something she used to ask me to draw during long car rides. I mailed it without expecting an answer. The point was not to make her choose sides. It was to leave a clear line of connection. My next step was to contact Owen, my college roommate. We had not spoken in years, but I remembered that he had become a real estate attorney. Owen had always been smart, understated, and unusually good at identifying the practical issue hidden inside an emotional mess. When I texted to ask for a meeting, he replied within an hour. Are you buying a house or burying someone? Legally, despite everything, I laughed. I told him I was not trying to bury anyone. I needed advice and wanted to send a clear message. We met for coffee and I explained the full situation. Owen listened without interrupting, occasionally asked a question and took notes on a yellow legal pad. I showed him the messages, the landlord's explanation, the unauthorized renewal, and the records confirming that I had told Vanessa I was leaving. When I finished, Owen looked at me and said the conduct was serious. He explained that signing and submitting my name without authorization could carry real legal consequences, and that I was right to document everything. He asked whether I wanted to pursue a formal complaint or consider further action. I told him I was not ready to do that. I want options, I said. I want them to understand that they can't involve me in their finances again. I don't want another signature, another account, or another story where they claim I agreed to something I never agreed to. Owen leaned back and said, so you're not looking for a fight. You're looking for leverage and a boundary they can't pretend not to understand. That was exactly it. Owen drafted a cease and desist letter. It was precise and unemotional. The letter described the unauthorized use of my name, stated that I had not consented to the lease renewal, directed Vanessa and Grant not to represent me as responsible for their financial or housing obligations, and warned that any future attempt to use my identity or involve me without authorization could lead to formal legal action. It did not contain dramatic threats. It did not insult them. Its power came from clarity. We sent it by certified mail, with the signature required. Vanessa signed for the envelope. 2 days later, my phone became a storm of missed calls and voice messages. Some were angry, others were panicked. Grant left one asking, "You really think you can threaten your own family like this?" I did not answer, because the most important part of the strategy was silence. The less I explained, the less material they had to distort. Based on Vanessa's voice messages, both of them were imagining possibilities I had never mentioned. They thought I might sue. They worried I would tell the extended family. They accused me of trying to turn Sophie against them. I corrected none of those assumptions. I simply continued living. I applied for the team lead position and got it. I began saving more money. I took a weekend trip to Chicago, met friends, and laughed until my stomach hurt. After returning, I enrolled in a woodworking class, something I had wanted to try for years but never had time for, because my schedule had always been available to the household. The projects were imperfect, but I loved the concentration they required. I was not merely recovering from the old life, I was building a larger one. At the same time, I kept track of the calendar. Vanessa and Grant's lease was approaching its end, and Mr. Bennett had already told me they were behind. I suspected the situation would worsen once there was no longer anyone quietly covering the missing amount. I did not want them harmed, and I did not hope for chaos. I wanted them to encounter the natural weight of decisions I had been carrying for them. For years, they assumed I would forgive fixed pay in return. Now they had to manage the household without treating my income as a permanent resource. Whether they stabilized or failed was no longer mine to control. The collapse arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was at my desk when Vanessa texted, "Adrian, please, we need to talk. It's serious." I did not respond. An hour later, she left a voicemail, saying Mr. Bennett had served them notice to leave because they were behind on rent and he would not extend the lease. She accused me of ruining people's lives. I laughed once because what she meant was that I had stopped carrying them and the structure had begun to fall. The truth was simpler. Mr. Bennett had told me a month earlier that they had paid no rent since I left. He accepted excuses for a while, partly because children lived there, but after 3 months he began the lawful process to end the tenancy. He asked whether I wanted updates. I said no and requested only that, if possible, the children not be present during the final removal. He promised to do what he could. I did not celebrate. I understood that Vanessa and Grant were facing consequences created by their own missed payments, but Sophie would suffer too. News spread through the family because Vanessa was calling relatives for support. My mother contacted me shortly before the move and, for the first time, apologized. She admitted she had assumed I was fine because I was the responsible one and had not understood how much the household depended on me. They didn't hide it, I told her. You just didn't want to see it. She sighed and said she knew. We spoke honestly after that. She explained that because I rarely complained, everyone treated my silence as consent. I shouldn't have had to complain before anyone noticed, I said. She did not argue. Vanessa and Grant eventually moved into a cramped place with one of Grant's cousins. Their credit problems and the housing record made finding another rental difficult. A week later, Vanessa left a voicemail saying, "You win. Is that what you wanted?" I paused the recording because winning had never been the point. I had wanted the cycle to stop, the pressure, the manipulation, and the slow surrender of my peace. When I continued listening, her voice softened. She admitted that Mason's comment had been awful and that she should have corrected him. Then she said she had never believed I would truly leave. That admission explained more than any apology could. She ended by saying I could see the children and that they missed me. I missed them too, especially Sophie, but I did not immediately reopen the door to Vanessa and Grant. Some boundaries need time before they can be tested safely. Instead, I built a relationship with Sophie outside the household. We met for coffee after school. I brought her art supplies she had mentioned wanting. I attended her school play and stayed far enough back to avoid turning the evening into a confrontation with her parents. I did not ask her to choose sides or repeat what was happening at home. I simply kept my promises and showed her that leaving the house had never meant abandoning her. Over time, the rest of my life continued to grow. I earned another promotion and bought a modest condo. It was not impressive, but every wall cabinet and quiet Saturday morning belonged to me. I played music while making breakfast, chose what stayed in my refrigerator, and never worried that a request for money would appear before I finished my coffee. I started dating again, slowly and carefully, and met someone kind who did not need to be rescued. Healing was not instant, but it became visible in the ordinary choices I was finally free to make. Months later, a plain envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a typed letter from Mason. He wrote that he did not expect forgiveness and was not sure I wanted to hear from him. He apologized for what he had said at dinner and for the way he had treated me. He admitted that he had been trying to sound funny or impressive and had never considered what the words actually meant. Then he wrote that I had always been there and that the family had taken advantage of it. He said he saw that now, did not believe he deserved another chance, and regretted helping make me feel as though my only value was what I provided. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the back of the journal I had started on that first night in my new home. I did not write back. Some apologies matter, even when they do not immediately restore a relationship. Sometimes they are meant to be carried until both people are ready for whatever comes next. The last I heard, Vanessa and Grant were still rebuilding, with different jobs, a smaller home, and far less stability than they once had. I did not wish them harm. I wish they had learned sooner that another person's generosity is not a permanent financial plan. The real consequence was never the canceled vacation, the lease, the legal letter, or even the eviction. It was that I stopped sacrificing myself to preserve their comfort. They lost the safety net they had mistaken for an obligation. And I discovered a life in which I was valued for more than usefulness. For years, I believed I was the foundation holding their family together. I was not. I was the lifeboat they assumed would always remain beside them. When I finally stepped out, they had to learn how to swim, and I finally learned that saving myself was not abandonment.